welcome to the Bible study. My name is Kent Philpott, pastor of Miller Avenue Baptist Church in Mill Valley, California. And we are here at Marin TV on A Street in San Rafael. And we just love coming to Marin TV, about 16 years now. And we love the folks in the studio and all of our help. We want to thank everybody for everything they have contributed. And so we're doing the Bible study. And we are in the Gospel of Mark, right in the middle of the chapter, Mark chapter 6, beginning at verse 14. And it's one single story this time. Last week there were two, sometimes there's three, even four. But one story this time is called The Death of John the Baptist. John the Baptist. And I've used my sermon notes. I'm able to preach these sermons before I come here to the studio. It's more easy to preach the sermon at church than it is to do this. So I try to do all the sermons before and I come to the studio. And so I have a reflection. I try to put together one of the main themes of the passage that we're working with. And this one is, we are in the spiritual genealogy of John the Baptist. Now that may sound a little bit strange, but anyway. Now the name John, it means Yahweh or Jehovah has been gracious. That's the word what John means, that God has been gracious to me. Now the word Jehovah comes from the Latin or the German. Latin and German, Hebrew doesn't have that J, and it's Yahweh, which means God, but in Jehovah comes from Latin and the German. Again, God has been gracious. So with John the Baptist, it's right in between that era, between the Old Testament, or what's called the Hebrew Bible, and the New Testament, or the Greek Bible. It's in that in-between period. There had been no prophets for about 4 centuries. About 4 centuries. And all of a sudden now, this guy shows up preaching. And in Malachi chapter 4, the last book in, the English versions of the Old Testament, we have a story about Elijah the prophet will come. And the great prophet. Now, John the Baptist was not a reincarnation of Elijah. Nothing of the sort. In the passage Malachi 4:5, Elijah would be taken to mean one of the great prophets, the first great prophet, one of the first great prophets. And there's nothing recorded about anything that he wrote. The other prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, and the 12 minor prophets, these prophets all had written material, and they are found in the Hebrew Bible. Nothing that Elijah wrote. So this is not the return of Elijah, but this is like the return of a great prophet like Elijah. There's a difference between the Eastern mindset and the Western mindset. The Western mindset tends to take everything quite literally and exact. If you take a number like 100 or 1,000, in the Western mindset would take that literally, but not in the Eastern mindset. 1,000 years could mean eternity. The Eastern mindset is a very different thing. And I remember trying to learn this from my professors, both from the Old and New Testament when I was in seminary, and it was very difficult to grasp because I wanted it to be, my mindset. And to learn the Scripture and be able to preach and teach it, you have to be able to operate with the Eastern mindset in your interpretation or understanding of Scripture. And so that's what it is. So he was a Nazarite, meaning he led a simple and plain life, rough. He was living out in the country. Why was he named John the Baptist? Now, the word Baptist means to dunk. Is you're here in water and you're laid down in the water and you're brought up. Dunk. The German Baptists are called dunkers. At Antietam, the big Civil War field up in Maryland, I've been to a number of times, there is right on the battlefield a church building. I've been in it a number of times. It's called Dunker Church. It was a German Baptist church that had come there to Maryland, of all places. So what John was doing, he was inviting people to come forward, come to him to prepare for the arrival of the Messiah, the Christ. They've been expecting him for 4.5 to 5 centuries. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But now here comes this guy down on the Jordan River, by the southern part, not far from Jerusalem, and he's baptizing people. Said, get ready, the Messiah is coming, and to do so that they would dunk people in the water and bring them up. Nothing magical. It was just an act to say, yes, I'm prepared for that which is new. I'm dying to that which is old. I'm prepared for that which is new. So he was called John the Baptist. Charles Haddon Spurgeon said, John was the first Baptist minister to lose his head through dancing. I'll read it again. John was the first Baptist minister to lose his head through dancing. And we'll see when we get further into the scripture, this passage, how that all took place. So now we're starting in Mark chapter 6, verse 14. 6:14. So it says, King Herod heard of it. What did he hear of? He heard about John the Baptist. He heard about John the Baptist. And by the way, Herod was not a king. His father, Herod the Great, had died in 4 BC, just about 1.5 years before Jesus was born. And Herod, after his dad died, 3 of the sons of him, the area of Israel was divided up. And he ruled over it from 4 BC to 39, a long time, 43 years. He was there for a long time. He was under the Roman authority. He wasn't a Roman. He was half Jewish. But the Romans allowed him to maintain this authority over these people and collect the taxes and keep the peace and so on and so forth. And so this is King Herod. Herod, his full name was Herod Antipas, Antipas. I looked him up in my computer, and he even had a picture of him that had been done, of course, many centuries later, but definitely a person of real history. So King Herod heard of it, for Jesus' name or his person, what he did, had become known. In other words, become famous. King Herod Antipas had heard about Jesus. Some said, John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. That is why these miraculous powers are at work in him. Okay, here's Jesus. They hear about him doing the miracles. All right, doing the miracles. Multiplication of food, walking on the water perhaps, casting out of demons, healing people, resurrection from the dead. They were hearing about it. And so what Herod said, this is John the Baptist come back alive. And here the story is going to be how he would have thought this. It talks about a very interesting period here and what actually took place This took place in reality. Okay. So it says John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. He's got a guilty conscience. He liked John the Baptist. Herod did. Listen to John the Baptist. But something weird happened, something really strange, and that's what this story is about. So just hang on, and I'll get to the point where we find out what Herod had done, and you kind of see that he's a little bit cracked up. He suffered greatly from all that he had done. He did a lot of weird, wicked, bad stuff too, let me tell you. So it says that is why the miraculous powers are at work in him. But others said he is Elijah. So Herod said John the Baptist. Others said he is Elijah, based on Malachi 4:5, about a prophet who was to come, who was, of course, John the Baptist. And others said he is a prophet, not the great prophet, but a prophet like one of the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, a number of people. Verse 16, but when Herod heard of it, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. Here comes the reason for the emotional, mental turmoil that Herod Antipas was experiencing. He was responsible for having John the Baptist beheaded. And that's the story. And it's going to be unveiled here as we go along. So he is fearful. His conscience is racking him. He's paranoid, perhaps. Verse 17. Now here comes the explanation. The first number of verses from 14 to 17, 6 through 16, 14, 15, 16, set up the story. So you got the backstory of a little bit is going to be the reason why all this happened. So now Mark goes into telling it. Very interesting that Mark tells the story. It says, for it was Herod who had sent and seized John and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, King Herod, Herodias, female, his brother Philip's wife, because he had married her. Now Philip was a half-brother of Herod. Herod Antipas was the seventh son of Herod the Great, the seventh son of Herod the Great. And so Herodias had been married to Philip, his half-brother. But, by the way, Philip was in Rome at this time. But here is Herodias, Herod and Herodias, down in Israel area. But he married her. Apparently, she sought the divorce. She wanted to be free from Philip, divorced him, and then married King Herod. Verse 18. For John had been saying to Herod, now here he goes, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. Okay. Some commentators say that maybe there really wasn't a divorce. Maybe there wasn't one. Other commentators said, no, they probably went through the process. Nevertheless, according to John the Baptist, that was not lawful to do, probably under Jewish law. Okay. So that's the story. So here comes John the Baptist, and he's pointing his finger at Herod and accusing him of something wrong. Verse 19. And Herodias had a grudge against him, that's John the Baptist, and wanted to put him to death. We find in Leviticus 18:16 and Romans 7:3 that Herod would have been considered an adulterer or involved in incestuousness. But Herodias took it very personally, and and knew that John the Baptist was calling her, referring to as an adulterous woman. So she was not happy. Okay, and she wanted to put him to death. But she could not. It says at verse 8, end of 19, verse 20, for Herod feared John. Very interesting. Here is John the Baptist basically accusing Herod Antipas of wrongdoing, yet Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and a holy man. He was not political, John the Baptist. He wasn't a Pharisee. He wasn't a Sadducee. Nothing like that. Obviously, a prophet, one anointed by God to bring truth. And so Herod feared John. He knew. It says, and he kept him safe. Herod kept John the Baptist safe. Interesting. Mark doesn't flesh out what that looked like. Maybe Herod sent a guard around him, warned people, keep away from John. Okay, you may not like who he is and what he's saying, but anyway, I like him. And I'm going to keep him safe. It says, when he heard him, here's the very conundrum. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed. The word means terribly disturbed. Why didn't Herod get rid of him? That's an unknown. But he knew that John was, as they say, a righteous, holy man, and he kept him safe. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet, Mark tells us, and yet he heard him gladly. What a confused piece of information here. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed. Okay, now we're jumping down to verse 21. But an opportunity came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his nobles and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. By the way, I want to read a passage of Scripture. John Mackenzie, a Christian writer, says, the worst form of functional mental disorder arise from a repressed conscience. And that's the little idea that Herod was suffering emotionally because of what John was saying. And before I came today, I ran off Psalm 32, 1 through 5. I just want to read it because I think it applies to us, to all human beings. And so here's King David, who had committed adultery and murder. Blessed is the one whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Blessed is the man against whom the Lord accounts no iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit. For when I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For night and day your hand was heavy upon me. My strength was dried up as the heat of summer. I acknowledged my sin to you. I did not cover my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the iniquity of my sin. And of course, David had in mind his murder and his adultery. So, here we have the opportunity. Herod gives a big birthday party for his courtiers, government leaders, that is, military commanders, the word in the Greek is chiliarchs, those who ruled over 1,000 men, and third, and the leading men of Galilee. These would have been the big rich guys, the powerful guys, and lived in there. And they would have been, Jewish people. Verse 22. For when Herod's daughter came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests. Now, from what I was able to ascertain about these kinds of events, they were wild and crazy. Women weren't allowed to be there. There was a lot of drinking going on. And there were some weird and strange stuff that I'm not going to go into. Big party. And when Herodias had a daughter, We find from Josephus. Josephus. I think I printed something out on Josephus. I want to tell you about Josephus. Josephus says that the daughter was named Salome. Now, Josephus, I want to tell you who Josephus is. About 50, 60 years later, Josephus writes this down. Flavius Josephus was appointed military commander of Galilee by Judeans revolting against Rome. This began in 66 A.D. He fortified the towns of the north, but eventually surrendered to Roman forces and joined them at the siege of Jerusalem in 70. After the fall of Jerusalem, he moved to Rome and became a writer under imperial patronage. Josephus is certainly among the most enigmatic personages in the history of the Jewish people. He wrote The Jewish War. I have a copy at my house. He wrote a history of the Jewish people, and he was commander of the Galilean forces of the army that opposed Rome for 2 years. He was captured, he was brilliant, and they gave him the job of writing a history of Israel and the Jewish nation. Josephus says this woman was named Salome, came in and danced, and it was likely, she was likely naked, commentators say. And the king said to the girl, "Ask me for whatever you wish and I will give it to you." Well, that's pretty crazy. Ask whatever you wish and I will give it to you. This is a public, what would been called a public oath. In other words, he was going to be bound by it. He said it straight, probably drunk, and so that's what he did. And it says, and he vowed to her, second time, and he vowed to her how this got to us. Very interesting. How did Mark know this? Well, somebody there told him. Somebody there did. Nobody, no idea who. But he vowed to her. I mean, we're having quote. Well, this is quotes here. Whatever you ask me, I will give you up to half of my kingdom. Likely a figure of speech. That's what a couple of my commentators said. It was just something that people said that we're in power. I'm going to get, I'll give you half my kingdom, and not a literal promise. So Herod says it's twice, and that's why most commentators said the guy's pretty well shot. And she went out and said to her mother, notice the mother was not present. This Salome was the only woman there. Said to her mother, "For what should I ask?" And she said, "The head of John the Baptist." The head of John the Baptist. Okay, here it is. Herodias, well, she couldn't take the charge of John the Baptist accusing her of serious sinful behavior. To the point that if Herod, of course, had assented to what John the Baptist said, Herodias would have been separated. She would have been sent away. She would no longer have been in that position of power. And she'd already, apparently, divorced her husband, Philip. So she would have been out. And you can understand why she would have been so interested in killing John the Baptist. He was a major thorn in her side. Verse 25, and she came in immediately with haste to the king, that's Salome, the daughter, with haste to the king and asked, saying, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. There you go. So you're Herod. And this is what you just hear. The daughter of your wife wants you to kill, murder, a guy that you've got in your prison, that you've locked up. Verse 26, and the king was exceedingly sorry. Another way of saying it was deeply grieved. But because of his oaths, he said it twice, his oaths and his guess. It's interesting that Mark has information that there were two oaths. That's why that's a plural here in the Greek. Because of his oaths and his guess, he did not want to break his word to her. He was trapped. He was trapped, drunk and trapped. And wow, what a mess. Verse 27, and immediately the king sent an executioner, in the Greek it's soldier of the guard, executioner with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in the prison. I just was thinking before we came here what John the Baptist must have been experiencing. Here comes this guy. It's apparent he's going to have his head cut off. That's it. Just imagine John the Baptist, one of the people sent by God, one of the great last prophets before Jesus. And here he's going to have his head cut off. What kind of a good God is that would allow that to happen? That runs through my mind. But it's unexplainable. But it took place. It was real history. There was no protection of John the Baptist. I'm sure the Lord could have done that, but he didn't. There's more to it that we're not going to be able to comprehend. So he went and beheaded him in the prison and brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl, and the girl gave it to his mother. That would have devastated that young lady. She had just been through humiliating naked dancing in front of all of these men jeering at her. Now she has to carry this bloody, severed head. Verse 29, when his disciples heard of it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. Okay. Wow. What an experience. There are still followers of John the Baptist. They didn't disappear for a long time. They were called the Mandeans, an ancient ethno-religious group who believed that he is their greatest and final prophet. It said, in fact, to this day, a community of disciples of John the Baptist still exist in the Middle East. Okay, listen, I got to wrap things up. This was taking me longer than I thought it would. So, anyway, this is the account, and it just has this ring of reality, of truth. And we always will respect the work and the ministry of John the Baptist, who came announcing the coming of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. So long.